Ever since you can remember, you felt something in your chest telling you to move, to love, to speak, to try. Day after day, you pretend you don't hear it calling, or maybe you dismiss it as silliness or worse. But it's there, ready for you, and it will wait for you as long as you need. My name is Johnny G, and I invite you to join me on a journey of awakening as we dare to embrace our light. This is Refractive. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Refractive Podcast. I am Johnny G, and I have a guest with me here today, Mr. Tom Coderre. And Tom is currently a regional administrator with SAMHSA. That is the federal agency that works with substance abuse and mental health issues. Before that, he was a senior advisor to the governor of Rhode Island. Going back into his history, he was a member of the Rhode Island Senate from 1995 to 2003. He was also a chief of staff for the president of the Senate from 2009 to 2014. So Tom, welcome. I'm so happy to have you join us on Refractive.
Thank you, Johnny. It's great to be here. I know we've been talking about this for a while, and I'm excited the day has finally come.
Yeah. So we're good friends, you and I. For the listeners out there, Tom and I have been in the same circles in Washington, D.C. for several years. Even though he's moved back to Rhode Island, we've still maintained a pretty close friendship. And because I know some of his background, as I was thinking about potential topics and podcast guests, he was on my short list. And so, Tom, you and we decided that something that might have some good meat to it was talking about self-acceptance.
But before we begin, I'd love to share a short story with your listeners. Is that okay?
Yeah, please.
This one is about a man who, by the time he was 30 years old, was pretty successful by most people's standards. He came from a good, loving family, and he had many friends. He had been employed in nonprofit management and development for many years, and he had risen in his career to become the executive director of a large nonprofit agency.
Oh, I thought you were talking about me for a second, but I see that that's not what we're talking about. Okay.
This man was also very involved in his community, and he had a love of politics. He got elected to the state Senate when he was 25 years old. On the outside, everything about this man's life looked normal. Some might even say perfect. However, on the inside, he was tortured. So he turned first to alcohol and then to other drugs to cope with the stresses that he was experiencing. Underestimating the power of these substances and not understanding the neurological consequences of taking them, he quickly became addicted, and his life started this downward spiral. As his life began to unravel, he started to lose the things that were most important to him. When his family and friends tried to help, he resisted their help. He pushed them away. This caused him to lose them. He lost interest in politics. He lost his job and eventually his position in the Senate. His health deteriorated. He lost his apartment and became homeless. He lost his spirit. He lost his freedom. In the end, he lost pretty much everything, even his desire to live. This man's life, which at one time was so full of hope, became hopeless. And I know this story pretty well because, as some of you may have guessed, it's mine. And fortunately, I was able to get the help that I needed. And today I'm a person in long-term recovery, which for me means I haven't used alcohol or drugs since May 15th of 2003. And my life has gotten a whole lot better. In fact, being in recovery has not just enabled me to create a better life for myself, but it's also I've been able to create a better life for my family and ultimately my entire community, because recovery does that for people. Everything about you changes when you get into recovery. It's not just about stopping the use of alcohol and other drugs. It's about creating that better life. Yeah. And so that's kind of, I thought would be helpful to frame things, Johnny, so that your listeners knew kind of the perspective I was coming from.
Yeah. So, there's been a lot of twists and turns. I mean, certainly in my story, but in your story as well, where things have been going upward, things have been going downward. And, the human psyche is fragile. And the things that we feel nourish and protect us one day, when they're taken away, we go crazy,
Well, we don't live in a bubble either. And so we have like this outside environment that is continually changing, right? And we have to respond to it. And it's oftentimes in that response, right, that we find out who we are. We find ourselves, and sometimes we find weakness, but other times we find strength.
Yeah, yeah, that's right.
I
What were
think
the parts? Go ahead.
No, because I think this is important too to talk about. I want to let you know that one of the reasons that I used alcohol and other drugs was a lack of self-acceptance, and it was a lack of self-acceptance, particularly around sexuality. I was attracted to men, and I was confused by that. I was raised a Roman Catholic, and I was part of a political family. My mom was also involved in politics, so I learned to suppress my sexuality and those feelings that I had for men at a young age, and pretend that they didn't exist. And when I realized that my alcohol and drug use was getting out of control, right, and I tried to reel it back in and get into recovery, I failed because I was riddled with fear and afraid to expose that part of myself. So I continued to struggle, and I knew if I was going to be successful on this journey, I needed to face my fears, as they say in recovery, right? Fears are either like frick everything and run, or face everything and recover. So I had to face everything, and I started sharing this first with my counselor in treatment. I shared it in psychotherapy. I very slowly started to share it in 12-step meetings. I was doing spiritual direction at the time. I was doing everything I could to kind of be additive to my recovery process. And to make a very long, painful story short, what I came to find out in the end is that the only one that had a problem with me being gay was me. And and that the sooner I could figure that out, that the easier it was going to be on this journey of life, not just of recovery, but of life. And that, the sooner I could get self-acceptance around it, the more freedom I would gain in my own personal life.
It's so powerful to come to the conclusion that you did, that the only issue is inside yourself.
Yeah.
It's one of the major signposts of spiritual growth. And I know that you've gone through this, and I've certainly experienced it, that the problems that we perceive are from our own ego-centered fears. That really is the reality that we project and create and manufacture. And the people around us, sensitive energy beings that everybody is, they give us exactly what we ask for. I mean, it's fascinating to realize that the power was inside the whole time, right? Like the authority to drop the pain was within you. It's like Dorothy, like you've had the power the whole time. You just weren't ready for it,
Exactly.
Dorothy.
Well, it's funny that you say that too, because, I think about my family, like my family and I still don't talk about this. And the reason we don't talk about it is because I've made it very clear to them, like through that energy, never spoken, but through that energy, that I don't want to talk about it, that this is like a topic that's off limits. And it drives me, insane, because I really probably should be talking. I mean, like that's probably next on my list of things to tackle in this process 17 years later, is to actually get honest with them and say, you know what, this is who I am. This is what I've gone through. They already know, but I've just made it. And I've invited them to things where I've talked about it. Like I've had different ways to kind of express it to them. But I've kind of also at the same, it's one of these things where we do this, I want you to come closer, but stay farther away. And like you said, that's an energy that we set up with them. And I got to break through that in some way. And I got to break through it with, like, I've been able to break through with it with friends. I've been able to break through in recovery circles. I've been able to break through even in the workplace, where I've had some really uncomfortable but important and growth opportunities to talk about this. And I'm glad I at the end of these conversations that I have with people, I'm always happy I've had it. I've
Yeah.
never been, I've never like regretted having the conversation.
Yeah.
So I don't know why that doesn't inspire me to just do it more, but it's that fear. It's that
Yeah.
fear.
Well, what do you, if I can ask this, what do you assume their willingness and openness to talk about this with you is like?
It's that's hard to say, but I think it might behoove us to kind of like turn the clock back a little bit, right? And to talk about kind of where the fear was rooted, because I kind of mentioned growing up a Roman Catholic, being part of a political family, societal norms being what they were at the time. Like people didn't talk about
Back in the
being gay.
60s.
Yeah, 70s. I'm sorry. I'm not that old. The 70s and 80s were when I grew up. And it was during those decades that I learned these behaviors. And anybody who was gay hid it and didn't talk about it. And even the sexual experiences I had early on in life, it was like it was wrong. It was like hush hush, like it was anonymous, like it was like all these clues that I had was like, no, you don't talk about this.
Yeah.
You don't talk about it. You don't address it. You pretend like it goes away. And I even dated women. Part of it was because I was confused, like I said earlier, and I was trying to figure that out. Like, okay, can I actually have a sexual attraction to a woman? Can I perform right in that way? And I was, and so then I was like, well, maybe I'm bisexual. But then thinking about, the emotional connection that we bring to relationships, I wasn't able to make those same kinds of emotional connections with women that I was with men. So that's how I ended up, and I had conversations with people. People were like, you got to pick, you just got to pick one. And I was like, well, that's a little simplistic maybe, and I don't think, the generation today thinks that way either, right? Generation today, I mean, they're growing up in a different time where things are different, and we can talk about that as the podcast goes on. But back then, all the cues were that you didn't talk about it. Things were not fluid. You were one or the other. Yeah. And, if you accepted one, your life was going to be somehow you were going to be ridiculed, and you were going to be an outcast, and you were going to have to really fight for yourself every single day. And I was like, not interested in doing that. Plus, I had these plans to be, to run for elective office and to be, this upstanding member of my community. And how in God's name was I supposed to reconcile those two things?
Right.
And so, so this is what ended up forcing me to push that part of myself further in to myself. And I regret that, I regret that, but I don't live in regret today, because I realized, like, my human experience was exactly the human experience I needed to have at that time, and it was okay. And today I have awareness around these things that I never would have had I not gone through those experiences.
Mm-hmm. I don't know about you, but when I look back at the times where I abused alcohol, I often really appreciate the role that alcohol played for me, because I feel that if I didn't have those moments of feeling free of that crippling, crushing fear that you talked about, if I didn't have those untethered moments where alcohol made me able to see a future that could feel free, I'm not sure I'd be alive. I think I would have killed myself, and I and in that sense, I really do appreciate the role it played for me. What was that like for you?
Well, I've never really thought about it that way, but that makes a lot of sense to me, of course, because I had those same experiences, right? So I used alcohol to lower my inhibitions. And because I lowered my inhibitions, I was able to experience things that I wouldn't have experienced otherwise. So yeah, then that was kind of the experimental part of like, do I like being in this situation with this person or these people, and can I survive in that kind of dynamic? And you're absolutely right. I wouldn't have known that if I had not had that helper, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So how did you move from this, I guess, this period of fear and frustration with
Yeah.
what your insides were saying to a new way of processing life?
Yeah, well, as I spoke about in telling about my story, it became a survival, a requirement for survival, right? I almost died as a result of my addiction. When I got into recovery, I was 132 pounds. You looked into my eyes, you wouldn't think I had a soul. I was on the pathway. I was on this declining pathway, right? That I could have died from my disease. So when I got into recovery, and I, knew I had to address this, like alcohol and other drugs were but a symptom of my problem, right? Those were things I used to change the way I felt or not to feel. And so I realized without those things, I was going to have to feel again. and from a survival perspective, I was going to have to deal with that. So I started, like I said, sharing this, with my counselor in treatment, who validated my experience and who said that was okay to feel that way. I ended up going to 12-step meetings. They have 12-step meetings that are specific to LGBT people, and I met people there who were just like me, and I heard their stories, but were just like mine. And people told my story at the meeting. I got a sponsor who was gay, who had those experiences, who I could talk with about mine, and I just kind of plowed through. It's kind of like that, that old saying they have that courage is not an absence of fear, but it's what we do in spite of it. You have to kind of summon the courage to kind of plow through these issues, to address them, like to actually show up at that first meeting. As uncomfortable as that felt inside. And as I was walking up the pathway to the door, as I put my hand on the door to push it to go into that meeting, I had second thoughts, and I was like, I can't do this. And I had to push forward again and say, well, if I don't do this, I may die. And so I did that work. And then it's never really become easier. I want to say that too. Like I've just gotten better at plowing through, right? I've gotten stronger and able to power through, but I still get those same feelings, that the butterflies in my stomach. I remember I took a Dale Carnegie course when I was in my 20s, and the instructor, Dale Carnegie courses are about learning how to be a better public speaker. Typically, I mean, there's a lot of other stuff that go along with them, but that's why I took it. And one of my classmates in the class raised her hand one night, and she asked the professor, she said, every time I get up to speak, I have these butterflies in my stomach. She said, when will they go away? And he thought for a moment, and he said, they don't go away. What we do is we learn to teach them how to fly in formation. And I thought that was beautiful. And I've kept that with me for all these years. And I think that's the same kind of experience I have about dealing with my sexuality or my lack of self-acceptance. It's not, it never becomes comfortable for me. It's always uncomfortable, but I've taught those butterflies to fly in formation. So that gives me the strength to kind of move forward. It's like, okay, I've felt this before. I know what this is. This is fear. This isn't something, this is a momentary feeling. It's not a fact. It's going to go away. I'm going to get to the other side of it. I'm going to feel a lot better when I get to the other side of it. So I've gone out and I've shared at conventions now. There's a a convention down in Florida called the Rainbow Convention, where I spoke for an hour, told my whole story. I told them things that I never thought I would share publicly. And here I am sitting in a room of 500 people sharing my story about that. I went to the World Convention of the fellowship that I'm a member of in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. And at the World Convention, I got asked to lead the LGBT workshop and shared a lot about my experiences dealing with this as well. So, yeah, so these experiences have also, it's not like I'm some expert in this and that I'm able to then share about it. It's that I'm going through it right now.
Yeah.
Like I'm in the middle of it and I'm going through it and I share about what it's like to go through it. The other piece is like when I share about it, whether it's today or any of the other times, I do a little preparation, right? I get prepared for those conversations. And that is an opportunity for growth as well for me, where I'm able to then dig a little deeper, like scratch a little bit more beneath the surface and
Tell me
say,
about
okay.
that. What do you mean by prepare for it?
So I'll be like, hey, I'd really love to share this part of my story today. Am I strong enough to do that? And what does it involve? So like, and I have to go back and think about that part of my story and think about like, okay, how did that occur? Why did it occur?
Yeah.
What made me like that? And so I'm scratching beneath the surface to, the origins of where these feelings come from and what experiences I had. Some of the experiences which I've, like I said, stuffed down so deep inside of me that it's taken years for them to emerge again. But that preparation brings those things up and helps me and helps guide me and then kind of takes me to the next level where so that's what growth is all like. Growth doesn't happen. You don't go from here to here, right?
Yeah.
You go from here to here and then to here and then to here and then to here. So the part of growth that happens, it happens by doing those kinds of having those kinds of opportunities and following through with them.
Yeah. Because, not everybody is, a gay man from a blue collar state, part of a Catholic political family. But, everybody through these formative years gets told by society that there's something about them that's not good enough, right? It's just a part of growing up in our culture that we get pushed down due to the fears of other people, right? Due to other people's need to feel that they're okay. And
Facts.
yes. And so I just, not everybody who's listening is going to walk into a 12-step meeting tomorrow and be able to dig deep and scrape this up and share it, but there are ways that if someone is like in the 12-step community, we say honest, open-minded, and willing. If someone is honest, open-minded, and willing, there are ways to go inside. I tell my clients that the answer is always, any answer is always in the stillness, and whether that is through journaling, whether that is through talking with a trusted friend or a religious advisor or a therapist,
meditation,
or what?
Meditation.
Yeah, meditation. That's right. Like to go inside and look at what's there. Because one of my favorite spiritual teachers, her name is Byron Katie, and I mention her on almost every episode because she's just so fantastic. She talks about how the root of all suffering is believing an uninvestigated story. And that anytime we feel pain because we feel we've lost something, lost someone, we're not good enough, we're believing something that we weren't born believing, that we came to accept as truth, but that if we were to stop thinking about, we would stop feeling the pain. And the minute we go back to thinking about it, we feel the pain. And therefore, it's the uninvestigated thought that is the cause of the suffering that we
Interesting.
experience.
Yeah.
It's arguing with what is real. So, as you live your life today in being more honest, open-minded, and willing to kind of walk through that self-examination, what does that look like for you in your current life?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. And it looks like a lot of different things, but I was thinking election day was a couple of days ago, and we had an election here where the Speaker of the House lost his election, and then there had to be an election for a new Speaker of the House. And the new guy that got elected Speaker of the House, they did a profile on him on the front page of the local paper here. And as I was reading through the paper, and I always suspected this gentleman was gay, but I had never asked him about that, or didn't know it for a fact, right? And as I read through the story,
because in your circles, because in your political world, you have
exactly.
access.
I interact with them. We're friends,
Yeah.
And but I only interact with them in politics. I don't interact with him socially, so I wouldn't know that part about him. But in the profile, the reporter simply
down
said,
a square dancing group together, or anything like that?
No. We don't
I don't
march
mean to
in the Pride
project
Parade. We have a march in the Pride Parade together with our with your bad. So I'm reading the profile on the front page of the paper, and it very matter of factly says Joe lives in Warwick with his partner Stephen, and period. That's it. That's all it says. And I'm like, what? Number one, that's the first time I've seen in print that Joe has a partner. Number two, they didn't make a big deal about that. Like 5 years ago, or maybe 10 years ago, the story would have been Joe is gay.
Yes.
And it wasn't even, they didn't even say that. They just said he lives in Warwick with his partner, Steve. So for me, I was like, wow, we've made a lot of progress. And secondly, I've seen, obviously Hollywood has done a really good job for us too, right? There's a lot of motion pictures that have been done. There's gay characters now. There's entire shows about, being gay. There's gay characters that are now just slipped into shows, right? To kind of give that perspective. I mean, that's really, I think, helped. And so as I see all these different things, and I'd love to talk about one, because there's, many of you, you have seen the movie Call Me by Your Name, and I think some of your listeners have seen it as well. And I have the book here. I saw the book a couple of weeks ago. I was with my mom, of all people, at the Barnes and Noble bookstore down where she lives. And I took her over there, and this book was there. And I was like, she's like, do you want to get any books? And I was like, well, actually, I want this one. And she didn't ask any questions or anything like that. It's an example of one way, right? Another thing, like before, I would have like ran away from that table that book was on. And if I was with my mom, but I put it right on the counter and bought it in front of her, and she didn't ask any questions or anything about it. She maybe not even know what it was, but I would have thought she did, and would have made some assumption about it. But this movie was great because I love that they didn't make a big deal about these characters being gay or about the relationship. I think it's Andre and Oliver have. So I actually am going to read from the Daily Beast has a version of this that I really like. And I'm going to read from that. The speech that the father gives to the son comes just as the film is nearly over. Elio is his name, not Andre. I'm sorry about that. Elio is nursing. How did I forget that? Elio is nursing his heartbreak after Oliver heads back to the U.S. at summer's conclusion, and his father, Mr. Perlman, the professor Oliver had been studying with, calls him over for a conversation on the couch. Without making assumptions, without making Elio feel uncomfortable, and without overstepping his bounds, Mr. Perlman tells Elio that he noticed the intense connection he had with Oliver. He doesn't judge, In fact, he wants to make it clear that he accepts it, that he encourages it, that he may even be jealous that Elio has been able to find someone to feel so intensely about, regardless of gender. You had a beautiful friendship, Mr. Perman tells Elio. Maybe more than a friendship, and I envy you. In my place, most parents would hope that the whole thing goes away or pray that their sons land on their feet soon enough, Mr. Perlman says. But I am not such a parent. In your place, if there is pain, nurse it. If there is a flame, don't snuff it out. Don't be brutal with it. Withdrawal can be a terrible thing when it keeps us awake at night, and watching others forget us sooner than we'd want to be forgotten is no better. We rip so much of ourselves to be cured of things faster than we should that we go bankrupt by the age of 30 and have less to offer each time we start with someone new. But to feel nothing so as not to feel anything, what a waste. Such a beautiful exchange, between that father and that son.
Yeah.
And I think, just like he envied his son for being able to have that experience, I envy the relationship that they have.
Yeah.
I didn't have those kinds of relationships growing up with people that I could turn to, that I could reach out to, that I could share kind of the feelings that I was having, and somebody who could help either validate them or process them, or just talk them through with. And I think, for people today to have these examples, and to see that on a big screen, and as a kid who may be going through those same feelings, right? Whether they be about self-acceptance, around sexuality, or something else, to know that they can talk about it and that they're going to be okay as a result.
Yeah.
I think it's a beautiful thing.
Oh, I think so too. And I mean, the idea of telling a child, follow your heart, trust your signals, and don't worry about the rest. Like, that is, it seems so simple.
Right.
And I'm not, this is not a criticism of my parents, but like, that's not the message.
And mine wasn't
society
either, by
gives
the way.
us.
Yeah, mine wasn't either, by the way.
Yeah. It's the message society gives us is tame your wild emotions and signals. Keep them under check all the time, because if you don't, you will fail in life. Like, that is the message we get. And for me, when I was unable to do that adequately, when I was unable to keep my signals that I was feeling in check, it made me feel like crap. And that is the reason that I would have turned so easily to something that would allow me to escape.
Right. And I
And
think
it doesn't have to just be alcohol. It could be
it's true.
sex, shopping, drugs, gambling, it can be eating, anything.
That's right. That's right. And I don't think our parents or the people who love us do that on purpose, right? I think they're afraid, like he was afraid that his son was going to get hurt. But the irony in all of this is that you get more hurt if you don't.
Right.
So the parents think that they're protecting us by, hey, don't go there, don't do that. You're going to be sorry if you did. But the truth is, no, you're going to be sorry if you didn't.
Right. That's right. That's right. I look at myself as having been emotionally stunted for 15 years, where my lack of willingness, and maybe even my lack of conscious ability at the time to explore my feelings, stopped the forward progression of my emotional functioning. And when my world became overrun by compulsions, many of them, all of a sudden, like I felt like I was learning how to emote at the same level as someone who was a teenager because
Yeah.
like I had never gone there.
Because you were
Yeah.
emotionally.
Yeah.
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 You know?
No, I feel that way too. As a 51-year-old man, to sit here and have these conversations and to feel like some of that uncomfortability or that's exactly where it brings me back to. It brings me back to my youth. It brings me back to when I was sitting in classroom and the teacher was going to yell at me, or I was going to get sent to the principal's office, or I was going to go home and my parents were going to yell at me. I mean, it brings me back to that kind of feeling, and the cues that we were given, uh, and our response to it was to shut down, right? To not to not not to emote during those times,
Mhm.
and to also to comply, right? To be like everybody else,
Yeah.
and that's not how humans are made.
Yeah. Do you still have areas in your life where you struggle with finding acceptance for yourself?
Of course, one of the big thing for me has been I have had real difficulty in relationships, in the area around relationships, because I just don't know how to be in one. I don't know how to seek them out. I don't know how to be a
Yeah.
successful person in one. I was in a same-sex relationship for like 5 years with with a guy who I am still friends with today. We haven't dated in a long time, but um, I probably had 5 years in recovery when I met him and I started on this journey. And our relationship was not successful ultimately, but I learned so much. And I
Yeah.
love this thing that gets said in 12-step meetings all the time, like relationships are character defect magnifiers. It's like taking a magnifying glass and putting it, here's my magnifying glass right here, taking a magnifying, put it right over your character defects list, because everything kind of comes out, and that person sees in you and then expresses, right? Because you're supposed to be in, something where you're willing to give and take in a relationship, and you realize how selfish you are, how how you realize everything about yourself
Yeah.
that you might like to change. So I am grateful for that relationship, for that, because it taught me a lot about myself. But I haven't been in a successful relationship since,
Yeah.
and I noticed myself, even in recovery, seeking other things out, like work, right? Becoming overwhelmed with work. Okay, I'm going to take these big jobs and I'm going to work all these hours, and I'm going to basically put myself in a position where I can't be in a relationship.
Yeah.
And I'm also going to send those energy cues that you talked about earlier, that, like, don't come too close to me because I don't have time for that.
Yeah.
I'm not interested in that. And it's been painful for me because it's led to acting out in other ways, sexually and other kinds of things that, um, I'm not proud of, but but they're part of my story.
Hmm. Yeah. You know, I have found over these last so over these last 3 years is when the bulk of my major spiritual growth has happened, right? And it's led me on this path and the podcast and like my current career and all of that. And it's what I've learned is that emotions are like muscles, and that um, in order to develop, I have to stretch them and let them heal a little bit, and then stretch them and heal a little bit. And for me, I had a pretty traumatic experience in high school, and it left me with like a really significant fear of groups of straight men.
Mm.
Whenever there would be three or four guys walking down a sidewalk, all, enjoying each other's friendship and laughing, like I would immediately tense up and I would feel like I was a target for them. And one of the things I did as a part of this growth was to go to sports bars by myself and stand next on game night and stand next to groups of straight guys who are screaming at the television and like just sit there. And like, it's so uncomfortable, Tom. Like
Yeah.
it's so uncomfortable. But once you've done it, you can look back and you have evidence that nothing happened. Nothing happened. And then it loses its power, And so there's been a lot of times where, I feel I have body insecurities, where I put myself in the most vulnerable position I can and go through it, and then realize after it's done that I'm alive,
That's right. You're alive, you're a human, you had an experience, you got to the other side of it.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, I guess as we wrap up, I think that's the nugget that I would want the listeners to walk away with, that when something is uncomfortable, if you're honest, open-minded, and willing, you're ready for the growth, then invite it.
Yeah, find a safe way to invite it, right?
Yeah.
So find a safe way to invite it, because our instinct, or our normal reaction, right, is to retract from it, and we really need to move toward it.
Yeah, that's right. That's where the power is.
Yeah. Our reflexes are wrong in that, usually in that situation. Sometimes for safety reasons, they might be right, but if it's safe, move toward it. Find safe ways to move toward it, and you'll grow as a result. But that's what this is about. At the end of the day, it's about growing. Personally.
That's right. Tom, I'm so grateful for you to have been a part of this episode. And if your story resonates with any of the listeners, is there a particular email address or anything that you would be welcome to receiving correspondence?
Yeah, sure. People can reach out to me at my name, Tom Coderre @gmail.com. TomCoderre @gmail.com. Happy to chat with anybody who wants to reach out.
All right. Perfect. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Everybody, this is Johnny G. You've been listening to Refractive. I am a spiritual and career coach and speaker operating outside of Washington, D.C. If you've enjoyed this episode, please go on and give it a rating. You don't have to type a single word. Just click a button for a star rating from 1 to 5, and it does help to improve the search results logarithms for other people to potentially access this material. If you'd like to be in contact with me, please send me an email. My email address is Johnny, JOHNNY, @refractivecoaching.com. That's also my website. Please feel free to go there and take a look at any services that might be beneficial to you. And remember, as you go through your days and you face your fears, always try to aim your light. Be good to each other. Have a great day. Bye, Tom.
Thank you, Johnny. Bye-bye.